Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Joining us on our game day segment in just a minute will be Brendan Quinn from the Athletic Detroit. First, a few of my thoughts to get us rolling. After the Penn State debacle last week, we needed a bounce-back win, and we got that against a pretty good team, Maryland, on Saturday. I still worry about our perimeter shooting, about the long scoring droughts we seem to go through, and our short bench. But that defense, it makes me feel good. We are 23-3, and we've had plenty of off nights on offense during those 26 games. But other than last week's Penn State disaster, the D has been more than good enough to carry us. At this point, we're going to have to ride that D and just find ways to gut it out and win and get as much from this offense as we can. On Sunday, Michigan State will pay a visit to Chrysler, and we all know what that game means. But we have to take care of some other business first, and that's on the road. Thursday, we travel to Minnesota, and while they have struggled mightily at times this year, they are a much better team at home, and we have got to bring it from the start. My guest today says the Big Ten race is far from over and might not be decided until that last weekend of the season when we visit the Breslin Center for the regular season finale. Brendan Quinn from the Athletic Detroit is up next here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Here with us on our game day segment this week is the outstanding basketball writer from the Athletic Detroit, Brendan Quinn. Brendan, once again, great to have you back with us.
Mike, always a pleasure, man. Big week.
It is a huge week, absolutely, as we get to that final stretch of the season. Looking back, though, at this past weekend, Brendan, coming off of a just pitiful performance in Happy Valley, Michigan, needed at home to come up and come back with a big win, and they did that against a very good Maryland team, didn't they?
Yeah, a solid all-around performance, once again kind of highlighting Xavier Simpson's overall importance, which it seems like you get kind of a smack-in-the-face reminder of every week or so. But then also probably pretty good to see Charles Matthews continue his upward swing. I think it's important for him to string performances together and not just kind of have these on-again, off-again type performances. And, to win with John Teskey and Jordan Poole going to combine 1 for 10 on threes, it's pretty good. It's a defense-first team, and as long as that's the personality, they can still win any game.
Well, you mentioned on Sunday in The Athletic that this could be, or at least the headline said, this could be Charles Matthews' last stand at Michigan. And he has been maybe not what a lot of fans thought he would be this year, but again, he's elevating at the right time. Is he the key for not only the next 2 weeks, but a run in the tournament for this team?
No, I mean, I wouldn't put it on one person like that. I think if Charles has a so-so NCAA tournament run, being not what he did last year, for instance, I don't think that then eliminates them from having a chance of making a run. I think Jordan Poole, everyone's kind of forgotten about him because he hasn't been shooting the ball well, but percentages say at some point he could get hot, and if he gets hot at the right time and strings games together, well, they're suddenly a completely different team. Or if Ignas Brazdeikis can kind of relocate his comfort level and kind of knowing when to go, when to shoot, when to drive, when to do all these things, he could still be their best player. John Teskey could be their best player on any given night. It doesn't need to be Charles Matthews, and that's it.
That might be the strength of this team offensively, Brendan. You watch them. I mean, every time I watch this team, I wonder, the first thing I think of is how did they get to 23 wins? Because the offense is it just doesn't seem to be in sync, but it's someone stepping up or two guys stepping up every night. And you wonder what would happen if 3 or 4 or 5 of these guys were hot at one time.
Yeah, I think John Beilein is wondering that too. I did early in the year, from November into December, I was operating with the theory that, just based on history, by the end of the year, the offense would catch up with the defense. And if the offense caught up with the defense, well, then look out. You're looking at a clear national championship contender. And that hasn't quite happened. The offense is still kind of enigmatic on any given night. The Maryland game was a perfect example. They looked brilliant in the first 5 minutes of that game, and then basically just relied on the defense for the next 35 to get them home. And, you kind of scratch your head sometimes. But, when it's a team of that still relies on going downhill, that's being defended differently than it was early in the year. I think people are still defending Michigan as you would a typical 5-out Michigan team. It's just not quite that. You can sag a little bit. There's no reason to step out on Xavier Simpson. There's no reason to step out on Iggy Brazdeikis. Right now, John Teske, because he had a couple breakout performances earlier shooting the ball, I think people maybe fell into a false sense of security that he's, it's basically Mo Wagner 2.0, and it's not that, right? He's a 34% 3-point shooter in league games, which is great. But I mean, if you really look at the numbers, his big games kind of were bunched together. He went 2 for 2 one game. He went 3 for 5 or something like that another game. And every other performance, he's not Mo Wagner. He can shoot the three. He's a threat. But if I'm an opposing defense, I'm okay with him taking that. And that's what Maryland was clearly okay with. And that's why he took 7 and he went 1 for 7. So, it's been quite a matrix for Beeline to try to figure out how to counter the way that they are being defended with the personnel and the skill sets that they have. Still, the key is Xavier Simpson with the ball in his hands, creating, getting into the meat of the defense, and trying to find leverage and passing lanes and creating driving lanes for those guys to go downhill.
Well, despite the struggles from the perimeter, from three-point land, and they have been struggles this year, you look at the numbers, this is not a typical John Beilein team when it comes to long-range shooting, and they have their droughts in just about every game. They go minutes, it seems, struggling. And then you look at the stats and say, this offense is number 3 in the Big Ten. At least they were coming into this week. I'm not sure how, but they just seem to get it done however they have to. And I suppose at this point of the season, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on the stats that you're looking at, too. I mean, I would go by Ken Palm's efficiency stats in league games only, and in that, they're 5th. So the main reason why, though, is the constants of the Beeline system. And it's, they don't turn the ball over. And as long as you're playing a low possession game and you're not turning the ball over, you're going to have an efficient offense. And that's, what Beeline has always done and always relied on. But you're right. I mean, there are games where you can't really figure out why they can't go on longer runs or just even look consistent for 40 minutes. It's kind of a moving target on when they do what they do particularly well. You just example after example. You remember back to like that Indiana game on the road where they just came out ripping and tearing, just looked amazing.
Yeah.
And then it just, like you snap a finger and it's just gone. So, I don't know. It's such an oddity of basketball where you can look at like a different team game to game and then within every game.
Well, offensively, that is how they've been. It's you never know what you're going to get. But, I've been watching Michigan basketball for a long time, and I'm an old guy back in the 60s, 70s, and I've seen some good teams at Chrysler. I don't think I've ever seen a team defense that's as fun to watch and as good as this Michigan defense is right now.
Yeah, and my thing with this team all along has kind of been that it's amazing. I think you can tell the difference when they go into games and they are more worried about ruining the opponent's offense than anything else. And those are the games I feel like where you see a different personality from this group, and not coincidentally, those are the games I feel like when the offense actually looks better too, because everything comes from the defense, right? If they are just demoralizing a team every time down defensively, well, suddenly that's going to impact the opponent's defense, or it's going to lead to maybe some runouts. It's going to lead to some turnovers, and that makes things a heck of a lot easier offensively. So the Maryland game was a good example of it, where they were locked in defensively, and that stemmed clearly from giving up 75 points to Penn State, and what Beeline said was basically the worst defensive performance in 2 years. Mm-hmm. It's not a coincidence that they rededicated themselves to being what they are. These are a bunch of players that on paper, when you look at them, you say, yes, this is a great defensive team, but like Iggy Brazdeikis is a scorer, man. Like, he wants to score the ball. Charles Matthews wants to score the ball. He wants to be an NBA basketball player. Jordan Poole wants to shoot. Like, these are guys who want to play offense, but they just happen to be a better defensive team. So it's almost like you just need that reminder going into every game. And like the Michigan State game next weekend, those internal meetings before it need to be, hold them to 55 points and, just ruin that offense. And don't worry, ruin Michigan State's offense. Everything else will come from it, man. Like the offense on the Michigan side of the ball can find a way to score at the end of the day. It might not be pretty, but they'll find a way to score. It's the defense that actually wins the game, though.
Well, every game huge now. There just aren't that many left. This week it's on the road to Minnesota, though, and I know they have not been overly impressive, but you just have to look back to last week in Happy Valley and see what happens if you don't bring it on the road. These guys are a tough out in their place, aren't they?
Not only are they a tough out, but they're playing for a lot. Minnesota is 17-9 overall, 7-8 in the league. I know everyone watches Minnesota, and it doesn't look like an NCAA tournament team a lot of times. And I think more than any team in the conference, they probably get picked apart and maybe even belittled sometimes. But outside of the winter vortex of the Big Ten, Minnesota is in the NCAA tournament right now, and it's on the bubble, but it is in the thick of the conversation. They are playing for a lot. This is a game out there that I think goes a long way in rubber stamping them as an NCAA tournament team, because after Michigan, they close out the next two games are Rutgers and Northwestern. Now you're talking about a team that they have, there's a good chance that if they could win this game, they can get to 10-8 in the league before finishing with Purdue and Maryland. Like, there's a lot on the line for Minnesota. The numbers don't like Minnesota. Sometimes when I watch them in person, I think they look indifferent. When I was at the Michigan State game, when they were in East Lansing a couple weekends ago, and they're walking up and down the court while Michigan State is putting a 20-point beating on them. But lo and behold, in terms of the NCAA tournament resume, like, they're right in it. So yeah, they're playing for a lot out there. I'm not sure how the crowd will be, and sometimes I wonder whether a Minnesota fan would want them to win or not, because you sneak in the tournament. Well, that's another year of Richard Pitino. You just add on a year anytime they win. So I don't know what they want out there, but there's a lot on the line there. It's a dangerous game. Weird things happen at the barn. Remember, this is where Sadie Washington got a technical for jumping on the court once. Like, it's a weird building and weird things happen, and you're on the road. So it's a dangerous game. They can't get caught peaking to Sunday, I'll tell you that much.
Oh, no, absolutely. They have got to be focused, take care of business there. And we all know what's up next. Everyone in the State's talking about it already, as if there isn't a game in between. But, this Sunday, Chrysler Center, Michigan State. That's all you need to say. But how different is this Spartan team without Nick Ward?
It's very – Michigan State is a strange team. When Josh Langford went out with injury, obviously a huge loss on paper, and everyone knows what Josh Langford can give you. But if you just looked at the actual analytics of it and the numbers of Langford on the court and off the court, they were actually better with him off the court than on the court. And now somehow losing Ward, if you look at just the Big Ten numbers, believe it or not, it's the same thing again. The numbers in Big Ten play, just on analytics, are better with him off the floor than on the floor. And I know that this sounds completely improbable, and anyone who doesn't, I'm not a huge metrics guy, but, I appreciate the value that they bring. And anyone who's anti-metrics would say, that's just a ridiculous thing. My eyes say what Nick Ward gives you. Well, that's true, but the numbers don't lie either. And I think they can get by. The biggest effects of Ward's absence are the fact that on any given day, he can be the best player on the court and he can win you a game, right? He can go for 25 and 12. The problem is you have no idea when it might happen or not. And the other thing is, by him being out, their depth is very much called into question. And if you're talking about Thomas Kithier having to play extended minutes, or you're asking Xavier Tillman to play 30, where I don't think he'd be the first to admit he's probably not quite conditioned right now to play 30 minutes. Or if you have to go deep bench and you're talking about Marcus Bingham or Braden Burke, who's a walk-on, like if that's the residual that they have to survive 10 minutes in the deep bench, like that's the problem. I don't know if it's as much about, Ward and his basic, whatever he averages, 14 and 7 or whatever it is. Like Michigan State, I think, can find ways to score and can. It's a Cassius Winston first team. If Winston went down, forget about it. Pack it up, right? I don't think this is a pack it up situation. Are they a Final Four team without Ward? I don't know. But that might be a moot point because I think you'll be back for the NCAA tournament. That's at least the sounds of it. So for this matchup, though, like Nick Ward isn't a good matchup for Michigan. So Michigan State doesn't really want him to try to have to deal with the ball screen stuff that Michigan brings. So on paper, based on the last matchups, like losing Ward, I don't know how much of an impact it has on this game. At the same time, in Ward's junior year this season, the times that have kind of been gut check moments for him, like his game in Columbus and a few others, like he stepped to the table and he really performed well. So, you can't speak in hypotheticals, but maybe he had that in him because he has a bad history against Michigan, and maybe this was going to be the year he kind of got that monkey off his back. That could certainly have been the case, but we'll never know.
Well, given State's injury situation and the fact Michigan, after this weekend, still has to go on the road to Maryland, you would think there is still a good chance it could all come down to that last game at the Breslin in March, Brendan. And wouldn't that be insane? Michigan State for the regular season Big Ten championship. It would be crazy there, wouldn't it?
It would be incredible. There's a number of ways it could play out. They'll still need both would need Purdue to still kind of take a step back and maybe lose a game that it shouldn't. Purdue's lurking there at 11-3, while Michigan and Michigan State are both 12-3. So if you're planning on a split, if Michigan and Michigan State can both manage to win out but split with each other, that would put them both at 16-4. So you would need Purdue to lose 2 games for that to truly be a Big Ten regular season conference championship game, which I think we all want. I think it would be awesome.
Yeah.
And in that case, it would be fascinating because if it's for a split, then you get the 2 teams who both have banners, or one team gets it by itself, which would be a lot on the line. And then for Big Ten tournament seeding, for anyone who cares about that, Michigan would hold the tiebreaker if they do split because it went 1-0 against Purdue.
A lot has to play out before we get to that point, of course, and anything can happen. As we've seen already this year, with fans and media, everyone gets ahead of themselves. We're all talking NCAA tournament and seeding, and yes, it's premature. It's fun, though. If both Michigan and Michigan State finish strong, and maybe it comes down to that final game in East Lansing, do you still see these teams as number 2 seeds, both of them possibly?
Yeah, I think that's in play. If they both finish strong, and I think you could even see, say if one misses out on a share, right? So say, like hypothetically, if Michigan or Michigan State shares it with Purdue, for instance, and then maybe the other one reaches the Big Ten championship game and loses. I still think they would both, a lot of this depends on what other teams do, but I think the overall strength of both of those resumes would probably have them on the 2 line. I think that sounds right. Yeah.
Well, Brendan, you cover both Michigan and Michigan State for the Athletic Detroit, and so you get to see both of them. Which of these 2 teams, and this might not be a fair question right now with the Michigan State injuries, but which of these 2 teams do you think is best equipped to make a run in the NCAA tournament, maybe past the first weekend?
I mean, I think they're both more than equipped to at least make it past the first weekend. To make a run maybe reminiscent of Michigan's last year, it's really hard because you would say, man, Michigan's at least got the defense to do it. But the problem is Michigan State has the defense too to do it. They're an elite top 10 team nationally in defensive efficiency. So, man, it's really hard when you look at. I would say if I had to pick one that probably is more equipped to do so, I would maybe say Michigan right now. And it's just because I think they have multiple players who can take over a game offensively. And as it's been seen in the NCAA tournament, like sometimes you just need one guy to have a game that the other team can't scout for. And Michigan, by a hair, probably has a little bit more makeup for that part of the conversation because they're both defensively elite. Now, the thing is that like the real answer to this question, which is a complete cop-out, is it's all dependent on the draw. If you run into a team that's just a terrible matchup and you get bounced, that's the stuff that those are the breaks you get, right? Where you look at Michigan's run last year to have the not to dismiss what they did, but to be able to go into the NCAA tournament and go Montana, Houston, Texas A&M, Florida State, Loyola, Chicago as your road to the national championship game. I think anyone who's honest with themselves would say that's pretty advantageous. You're not going to get much better than that on your way to the tournament. And along the way, it takes a miracle from Jordan Poole to get you there. So, these, when you're breaking down the conversation of who can go further, it's really who gets luckier sometimes.
Well, a final question for you, Brendan. At this time next month, March Madness will, of course, be in full swing, and we're all focused on the Big Ten, you on Michigan, Michigan State. So it's tough sometimes to get a national picture. At least it is for me. I watch as much as I can, and I think, I don't know who I could say is a favorite, or who even are the best teams out there. A lot of people talk about Duke, but do you have sort of a feel, if you had to pick a team or a couple of teams right now to say they are the teams to beat, who would you say?
Well, I really like Tennessee. They really remind me a lot of some recent Villanova teams, just in terms of their age, their makeup, their moxie. They have multiple pros. They know what they're doing. So I really like Tennessee. I really like Gonzaga. I think they have the talent on both ends, offense and defense, to really make a run. Same goes for Virginia, which has a lot to prove after last year. Duke is interesting because of just the sheer force and talent that they have, but just the freshman-laden teams of late, at least in the NCAA tournament, have proven that it helps to be there. And what happens one game when their shots aren't falling and things can go off the rails. You see it with some of these one-and-done teams. I would just be a little bit uncomfortable picking Duke to win it all, but it's certainly with Zion and Barrett and just that whole crew of guys. Certainly have the makeup to do it, but beyond that, you're kind of outliers. I don't know. No team has really jumped out at me. Villanova is oddly kind of lurking there again. They suddenly are making all their shots after. I know they just lost to St. John's, but up until that, they were kind of cooking pretty good as a team that can just make threes and do a lot of things, but. I don't really like North Carolina because their teams are usually so dependent on point guard play, and it lacks that right now. Texas Tech is an interesting team, but can they score enough? A good sleeper might be Iowa State, which has really an interesting makeup, and that they were, what can Steve Prohm coach them to the Final Four or something like that? I don't know, but they do have some nice pieces. So I don't know. I'll circle Tennessee. I'll circle Gonzaga, Virginia. Those are the teams I kind of, if I had to pick a group, I'm not saying they're all going to go to the Final Four, but if I had to pick kind of a group that maybe my national champion would come from today, I'd probably look at them. We didn't mention Kentucky, did we?
No.
That's kind of hard to overlook a team that, everyone's going to talk about their NBA potential and stuff like that. But if you look at their numbers, it's actually their defense is better than their offense. And I like that for a team that does have an interesting makeup of one and done talent and returnees. The luxury of having a guy like Reed Travis for that team is really paying major dividends, and they're going to be a tough out in the tournament, no doubt.
Our guest today has been the outstanding basketball writer from The Athletic Detroit, Brendan Quinn. As always, Brendan, it's a pleasure having you on the show. And a couple of weeks down the road, once we get into full swing with March Madness, we'd like to get you back.
Happy to do so. And for anyone out there who is into basketball podcast, Dylan Burkhart, who I don't know if you ever had him on your show, Mike, but
yes.
Dylan Burkhart from UM Hoops and I, we have our own podcast, The Moving Screen. So if any like-minded folks out there who like this podcast would probably like that one as well. So be sure to check that out on whatever you subscribe to your podcast on.
Good deal, and we'll get it on the show notes so everyone has the link then, Brendan.
Thanks much, Mike.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, we have a date for the spring football game. It will be on April 13th at 5 p.m. There is also a planned event of sorts, a practice or a fan fest. We're not really sure at this point. It will take place a week before on April 6th. Additional information and details will be released in the near future, and we'll have those for you. Coach Kim Barnes-Arico and her team are red hot right now. They beat Illinois 70-56 in Champaign on Sunday. Thursday, Rutgers visits Chrysler, and on Sunday, we make the trip over to East Lansing for a big game with the Spartans. We are 18-9 overall, 9-6 in the Big Ten. Hockey is at home for a pair with Ohio State this weekend. They are 12-12-6 overall, 8-8-4 in Big Ten play. Softball had a rough weekend in the ACC Big Ten Challenge last week. They beat Louisville 6-0 in the opener, and then dropped the next three. Twice to North Carolina, and once to Louisville. They will be back in action this weekend at the LSU Invitational, and they are 4-4 to start the season. Baseball took 3 from Binghamton down in Port St. Lucie over the weekend to get their season started. This week we'll be down in Charleston for 3 games with the Citadel. Don't forget our free show app is available from the Google Play and iTunes stores. You can also hear us on Stitcher, iHeart, TuneIn, Spotify, and Wolverine Sports Radio. Later this week, I'll have our February Michigan Man Extra for you. Our guest will be Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports with our first recruiting update of the year. I'll update you on Facebook and Twitter probably sometime on the weekend or early next week. That will do it for now. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!